What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wenzel, and today we are talking about 5 must-start wide receivers in Week 13 of the fantasy football season. It is good to be back with you all after taking a week hiatus for the holiday. But before we dive into this list, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure you turn on those notifications as well. That way you will be alerted when all of our new episodes are up. Daily shorts. We have podcasts twice a week, 3 videos just like this every single week. Don't miss out on that. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you turn on those notifications. We have some rain in the forecast, and this week's matchups makes wide receivers honestly a little bit difficult to predict what the outcome may be, who you should start, who's going to be impacted by the rain. That being said, I've got a list of 5 players here that I feel confident that they should be in your starting lineups this week. And let's start that list off with Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Look, I have zero clue what it is about Zay Jones, but Calvin Ridley is playing so much better now that Zay Jones is back. Even while Zay Jones has been active this year, he has scored 20 or more fantasy points in 4 of 5 games where Zay Jones has been active this year. That is crazy to me. The only time Calvin Ridley didn't was in week 2. He is averaging 89 receiving yards and has scored 4 touchdowns in those 5 games. Like, I hate to boil it down to such a simple and frankly stupid science of, well, since Zay Jones is active this week, put Calvin Ridley in your starting lineup. You like the matchup with the Bengals too, right? In the month of November, they were 10th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 7th in fantasy points to wide receivers lined up out wide, which is where Calvin Ridley majorly plays, 6th in receiving yards allowed, and they gave up 17.3 yards per reception, to wide receivers. That was the most, 17.3. So fire up Calvin Ridley this week. The matchup is there. Zay Jones is there. There's a high potential he turns in another smash week of Monday Night Football. Let's move on to the next player now, Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers. Thielen, he might have burned too bright to start the year. He's had a very odd 4 to 5 game skid since their week 7 bye. He's been the wide receiver 38 in PPR formats since week 8. But he does have the chance to turn things around this week. He gets the Bucs. They are the definition of a pass funnel defense this year. They are top 5 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Second most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers in the slot this year. It's where Adam Thielen always plays. They are 2nd in receiving yards allowed, 5th in yards per reception. So all that screams to me that Adam Thielen should have a bounce back week. I am willing to take that ugly game last week, 1 reception on 3 targets. I'm willing to set that one aside and say that's an outlier because he's still been averaging 10 targets per game even amidst that 5-game skid that he's on here. So I still have confidence in Adam Thielen. I'm still willing to play him this week. And I still think the Carolina Panthers are always going to be chasing points with the overturn on the coaching staff. There's a possibility things spark again. There's a lot that could go right here for Adam Thielen. I would hate to bench him in a matchup where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have proven they are going to give up fantasy points to the wide receiver this year, and they don't really care. So fire up Adam Thielen. I still have confidence in him even after an ugly Week 12 performance. Next player, we're going to get a little bit deeper down in our bag here. Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. He is the other wide receiver I would be looking to start this week. And this could easily be Michael Pittman. I still prefer Michael Pittman to Josh Downs this week, but I want to get a little deeper. And dealing with an injury in weeks 9 and 10 before his week 11 bye, Josh Downs was disappointing, but he bounced back strong this last week. I don't think we can ignore 13 targets. 13 of them. It's him and Michael Pittman drawing targets in this offense. He only caught 5 of them for 43 yards, but the volume in his first game back after being fully healthy, fresh off of the bye week, that is encouraging. Like, we cannot ignore that. You look back earlier this year, too, Josh Downs, he already had himself a very solid day against Tennessee. Caught all 6 of his targets for 97 yards. Good for the wide receiver, 18 on the week earlier against Tennessee this year. And they've struggled, Tennessee, to defend wide receivers in general. 8th in fantasy points allowed on the season, 10th in fantasy points, top 10, in fantasy points allowed to the slot, where Josh Downs is pretty much locked into in this offense. You have Jonathan Taylor obviously out with a thumb injury. I wonder if the passing attack gets slightly more emphasized now. Not that Zach Moss can't handle his own. We've already seen him do that this year. That's not me questioning Zach Moss. But I like Josh Downs as a borderline wide receiver 2 this week. I think he should be locked into your lineups. 13 targets is just nothing to shrug at. That's nothing to be like, outlier. Especially when we've seen Josh Downs be a target hog. It's him and Michael Pittman in this offense. So fire up Josh Downs this week. Again, I like him as a borderline wide receiver 2. Fourth wide receiver you should be looking to start this week now, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. And look, the process on this one is very, very simple. I'm going to boil it down into 4 points. Point number 1, Washington's defense stinks. Point number 2, the Miami Dolphins absolutely feast on defenses that absolutely stink. Number 3, the Commanders, they are going to be playing from behind all game long. They're going to be throwing the football like crazy. And because of that, number 4, Terry McLaurin is going to get a crap ton of targets just as he did against the Dallas Cowboys. There you go. It's boiled down into 4 points why I like Terry McLaurin this week. It didn't pan out against Dallas, right? He drew 11 targets. We only caught 4 of those for 50 yards. I think he could turn that around this week. And I know you look at Miami, and if you boil it down over the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've been fairly stingy. 8th fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, the 2nd fewest receiving yards allowed. But you got to go back and look at who they played. If you go back and look at Miami's last 6 games, let me read it off to you. They played an incompetent New York Jets offense last week on Black Friday. The week prior, they played an incompetent Las Vegas Raiders offense. The week prior to that, they played the Chiefs, who took 12 weeks to figure out that Rashee Rice is actually their best wide receiver, when most of us could have told you that after he had a phenomenal start to the year. They played the Eagles, and the Eagles, they fared just fine. And then they played, before the Eagles, an incompetent Carolina Panthers offense. With how much Sam Howell is throwing the ball, and with how much they're going to be playing from behind, I just trust Terry McLaurin this week to just volume his way to a perfectly fine performance. I don't think Terry McLaurin is going to go out and give you top 10 numbers this week. I don't think Terry has done that. He might have done that once this year. I didn't put that in my notes, but that's not who Terry is this year. But I think you can definitely start him in your lineups as a flex option this week. Again, he's teetering right around that borderline wide receiver 2 range with how many teams are on bye this week. The Commanders are just going to be playing from behind all game long. Terry McLaurin is going to get the volume. This is an offense that is better than the Jets, the Raiders, the Panthers, and I think they can hang just fine with the Miami Dolphins. Well, not hang just fine. Miami's going to smoke them, but their offense won't sputter into nothingness. I think Terry will be just fine in Week 13. Let's wrap it up, though. I'm going to stick in this same matchup, and I hate to end with such a, potentially maybe obvious one, but Jaylen Waddle has top 10 potential written all over him this week. I mentioned the Commanders' defense absolutely stinks this year. And I love this stat that my good buddy Tyler Plath, one of the other fellas, came up with, because he put this in a video that he's releasing later today in our shorts, which is why you should be subscribed and have those notifications turned on so you can catch it in his video. When playing against teams that have a below 500 record this year, Jaylen Waddle is averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game in those matchups. He's also drawn 8+ targets in every game but 2 since week 5. So the volume's coming back. The numbers are they're nothing pretty. They're nothing sexy. But Jaylen Waddle is still involved in this offense. And again, when he gets a team to beat up on, he takes advantage of it. Which is, again, I come back to it. It's all about the matchup. The Commanders are so bad, y'all. They're so bad against wide receivers. 2nd most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, the most receiving yards allowed, 2nd in yards per reception allowed to wide receivers, and 18, count them up, 18 of them, 8 receiving touchdowns this year. That is the most in the league. So I know he's coming off a solid game against the Jets. He had 2 little iffy games prior, but this is potential to have, for Jaylen Waddle to have potentially his best game of the year. The Dolphins' implied point total in this game, I believe, is above 30 points. I I think the Miami Dolphins can hit that, and I think Jaylen Waddle is going to be a part of that. He is no question a must start this week, and I think he has top 10 upside. Alrighty, that is it. That is all I have for you all. A little bit shorter this week. Don't have to go through 3 other players on top of the 5 I just went through. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're not subscribed to the channel, again, make sure you do that and make sure you turn on those notifications because we will be dropping videos every single day. If you do have a start-sit question going into week 13, I forgot to mention this at the top. I'm rusty. I'm shaking off some rust here. If you have a start-sit question, leave it down in the comments below. But my number one rule, if you're new here, is that if you leave a start-sit question, help somebody out in the comments below by answering their start-sit question as well. We love helping you all out with fantasy questions and giving you our thoughts on players, but at the same time, we want to be a community that helps each other win fantasy championships as well. So if you have a start-sit question, leave it down below. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that and turn on those notifications. Until next time, Tyler will be back with the waiver wire video. My gosh, to kick off next week. We'll have a podcast on Tuesday. We'll be back on Wednesday. Actually, no video on Friday next week. All 3 of us fellas be flying down to Miami, Florida. We're going to spend the weekend with our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. So thanks for tuning in. We will see you all soon. Stay safe, stay healthy. Until then, deuces.